Winter had finally let go of its grip. The air smelled different, lighter, like promises. Where I live, it's the perfect time of year, not too cold, not too warm. The skies are clear and wide. And in this gentle weather, one of my favorite events takes place, the annual Hot Air Balloon Festival. There's something whimsical about it, watching giant, colorful balloons float into the sky, like dreams rising from the earth. Every year, I feel like a child again, standing with wide eyes and an open heart, marveling at those skybound ships of color. It's silly, maybe, but for a brief moment, the world feels magical, like anything is possible. Luke and I have made it a tradition. We wake up early, grab warm drinks, and walk hand in hand through the morning mist to watch the balloons take off. And this year, as we stood there together, wrapped in the hush of sunrise, I turned to him and said quietly, "Next year, we'll be here with our little one." Just the thought made my chest tighten with emotion. A simple hope, but behind it, a whole universe of love and healing. Because there was a time, not so long ago, when I didn't believe I'd ever be capable of living a life this full of light. Back then, I didn't watch balloons, I watched ceilings, curled under blankets, paralyzed by fear I couldn't name. I grew up in an alternative learning environment, one that encouraged creativity, curiosity, and connection with the real world more than the digital one. I didn't grow up online. Part of it was just my age, cassette tapes were still a thing when I was a kid. But part of it was genuine disinterest. While others were learning to post and scroll, I was still sketching, writing, and walking in the rain. I didn't mind, I didn't feel like I was missing anything. Until I went to university. Suddenly, the world was overwhelming, loud, fast, constant, and I wasn't. I was quiet, hesitant, and increasingly anxious. The kind of anxious that made it hard to speak in class or go to the store. The kind of anxious that makes your own mind feel like a hostile place. So I did something new. I downloaded apps. I opened social media accounts. I started searching, not for likes or follows, but for help. I wanted to learn how to cope. I wanted to find people who understood. I joined online support groups, watched videos, read stories. I was hoping to hear someone say, "Hey, me too, and here's how I got better." But that's not what I heard. Instead, I was told, "This is just who you are. You'll have to learn to live with it. If you could recover, then maybe it wasn't that bad in the first place." I don't know why those words hit so hard, but they did, and I believed them. I believed that something inside me was broken beyond repair, that my anxiety defined me, that healing was only for people who hadn't really suffered. So I stopped looking for hope. I shrank. I moved through life like someone watching from behind glass, always present, but never quite alive. Still, something inside me kept going. Maybe stubbornness, maybe quiet resilience, or maybe it was just the smallest spark of belief that maybe, just maybe, they were wrong. One day, I stumbled across a YouTube video by a therapist. Nothing flashy, no miracles promised, just a calm voice explaining that emotions could be regulated, that the brain could be reshaped, that neuroplasticity was real, and that meant change was possible. I didn't believe it, but I tried anyway. I practiced breathing exercises, I journaled, I took slow walks, I unfollowed accounts that made me feel small. I started watching people who reminded me of gentleness, not perfection. I treated my inner world not as a battle, but as a garden, neglected. Yes, but not beyond tending. And then, quietly, something began to shift. I noticed I could get through a hard conversation without panicking. I could look someone in the eye. I could laugh and mean it. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't fast, but it was real. For the first time in my life, I realized something that changed everything. I experience anxiety, but I am not anxiety. It doesn't define me. It doesn't own me. It doesn't decide who I get to become. Now, I love making videos, not because I have all the answers, but because I want to offer the one thing I was once desperate for, a new story. A hopeful one, the reminder that you are not your wounds. And you are not stuck. The journey isn't easy, it's not linear, but it's worth it. And I've come to believe this deeply. We can't afford to let the most negative voices shape our inner worlds. Not in a time like this. Not ever. Because negativity is loud. It's addicting. It sells. It spreads faster than kindness. It tells us we're doomed. That we can't trust each other. That healing is a fantasy. But here's the truth I've seen with my own eyes. When we soften toward ourselves and others, when we allow the possibility of change, we begin to grow. Like the earth in springtime. We wake up, we breathe, we try again. And every year, when the hot air balloons rise into the sky, I remember that. I remember that the world is both heavy and light, and that we get to choose what we carry. Still, sometimes, I wonder, is it naive to believe everyone can change? That healing is for all of us? Or are we just fooling ourselves with pretty thoughts in a harsh world? Is it naive to believe everyone can change? Sometimes I ask myself that, especially on the harder days. The days when the news is filled with heartbreak. When people speak over each other instead of listening. When cruelty is easier to find than compassion. Hope, in moments like those, feels fragile, almost foolish. And yet, I keep coming back to it. Not because I want to escape reality, but because I want to live in it differently. Fully, kindly, truthfully. You see, I've come to understand something that I never really grasped before. Being optimistic isn't about ignoring pain. It isn't about smiling through sorrow or pretending the world isn't broken in places. It's not toxic positivity. It's not denial. Being optimistic, to me, is about balance. It's about recognizing the truth of suffering, your own and others, while still choosing to believe in the possibility of light. It's about being willing to sit with your fears, your sadness, your anger, and still saying, I will try to grow anyway. During the worst of my anxiety, I used to think that pain was the only real feeling. That people who talked about healing or joy were either lucky or lying. I rolled my eyes at cheerful quotes. I thought peace was for other people. But slowly, through experience, I began to learn that peace is something you build, not something you stumble into. It's an active process, a choice. And for me, that process began with one simple practice, watching my thoughts. Not in a judgmental way. Not to force myself to think positive. Just watching. I noticed how quickly I believed the worst about myself. How automatically I braced for failure, rejection, or embarrassment. How easily I absorbed other people's doubts as truth. I realized that if I was going to change anything, it would have to start from the inside. So I began a new kind of work. Not flashy, not fast, but deeply meaningful. I started treating myself like someone worth being kind to. I spoke to myself more gently. I allowed myself rest. I celebrated small wins. I asked better questions, not, what's wrong with me, but, what do I need right now? This shift in inner dialogue didn't erase my anxiety, but it changed my relationship with it. It gave me space to breathe, to respond rather than react. And that space, tiny as it seemed, was where healing began to take root. I read a book recently that described success not as wealth or recognition, but as inner alignment, the peace that comes from living in harmony with your values. That idea stayed with me. In that same book, one chapter focused on the habits of optimistic people. Not the cheerleader kind, not the performative kind, but the quiet, resilient kind, the people who believe in their ability to do hard things, find meaning in difficulty, speak kindly to others and themselves, choose compassion over cynicism, trust in the goodness of humanity, even when it's hidden. The chapter explained how these traits are more than personality quirks, they're life-shaping decisions. And the research behind it was fascinating. Studies showed that people who cultivated optimism, real, grounded optimism, tended to live longer, experienced fewer stress-related illnesses, and reported greater overall satisfaction with life. Not because bad things didn't happen to them, but because they processed and responded to challenges differently. Reading that, I paused. For most of my life, I never saw myself as a positive person. I was sensitive, overthinking, always preparing for the worst. I thought optimism was something other people were born with. But now, I see that it's something you can choose. Something you can nurture. Like a garden, you don't get to control the weather, or the pests, or the weeds that might grow. But you can choose what seeds to plant, what flowers you want to see bloom, what kind of space you want to tend to, day after day. And so I began to cultivate optimism, not as a mood, but as a muscle. I unfollowed voices that fed my fear. I surrounded myself with people who lifted others up. I asked more questions. I took more deep breaths. I tried things that scared me, not recklessly, but with softness. I stepped into new relationships. I allowed joy in, even when I wasn't sure I deserved it yet. I opened myself to stress and mess and beauty and discomfort, all the parts that make a full life. And yes, I still regress sometimes. I still spiral. I still lie awake on occasion, wondering if I'm enough. But now, I know how to come back to myself. I know how to breathe through the storm instead of drowning in it. I'm not healed, I'm healing. And every spring, when the trees begin to bud again, I'm reminded of just how natural that process is. There is something sacred about watching the world awaken after winter, about seeing what looked dead begin to stir again. The branches that once seemed barren are suddenly full of life. And in that quiet, blooming moment, I always whisper to myself, "You too, my dear, you too are allowed to bloom again." We don't often talk about inner life in that way. We focus so much on outer achievements, titles, timelines. But what about peace? What about kindness, gentleness, contentment? What if those were the markers of success? I think they are, at least, for me. The more I've grown, the more I've chosen peace over perfection. I've stopped chasing the applause of the world and started listening to the whisper of my own soul. And do you know something strange? The more joy I share, the more people seem to resist it. Whenever I talk about feeling deeply content, or genuinely hopeful, I often receive more criticism than praise. Some say I'm unrealistic. Some say I'm ignoring the world's problems. Some even seem offended by the idea that happiness is possible at all. And I get it. When you're hurting, other people's joy can feel like an insult. I've been there, but I also believe that shutting down joy doesn't make pain any easier, it just makes everything darker. We need both. We need truth and tenderness, honesty and hope, eyes wide open and hearts willing to feel. Because optimism, at its best, is not about pretending everything is okay, it's about believing we can get through the things that aren't. It's not a mask, it's a map that points us toward who we're becoming, toward the people we want to be in a world that desperately needs healing hands, listening ears, and open hearts. And the truth is, we don't always know where we're going. But if we walk in love, walk in faith, walk in kindness, we will not walk alone. The most surprising part of healing, at least for me, isn't the sudden joy, or the days that feel easier. It's the way ordinary things begin to matter again. Like the smell of coffee in the morning, the sound of birds outside your window, the small courage it takes to answer a message, to try again, to stay open. I used to think healing would feel like fireworks. Now I know it often feels like soft light spilling into a room you once kept dark. I've made some big life decisions recently. Things that used to terrify me, like changing careers, stepping away from things that didn't align with my values, saying no to things I once said yes to out of fear. I've said goodbye to certain paths, not because they were wrong, but because they weren't right for me anymore. And each step forward has been a reminder that I'm allowed to grow, to outgrow, to begin again. Every year, as I get older, I find myself becoming more consistent in one area, protecting my inner peace. Not in a selfish way, not by avoiding discomfort or pretending that life is easy, but by recognizing that the state of my inner world, my thoughts, my emotions, my self-talk, is the foundation of everything I build. It determines how I treat people, how I handle disappointment, how I find meaning in the in-between moments. And the more I invest in that interior life, not as a project to perfect, but as a relationship to nurture, the more I notice something incredible. I am at peace. Not every moment, but most. And that, to me, is nothing short of a miracle. I used to be afraid of getting older. I thought it meant losing time, losing chances, losing youth. Now I see it differently. I see aging as a journey of discovery, a steady unfolding of who I really am beneath all the fear and noise. Of course, there are still moments when old voices come back. You're not enough. This won't last. What if it all falls apart? But I'm learning not to fight those voices, just to stop believing them. Instead, I speak back, softly, but clearly. I say, you're scared. And that's okay. But I'm safe now. I'm growing. I'm strong. I never imagined I'd become someone who believed in joy so deeply, who believed in goodness, in other people, in life itself. But here I am, choosing joy not as a denial of sorrow, but as a commitment to balance. Choosing hope not as a fantasy, but as a discipline. And I've realized something else too. Joy doesn't exist in a vacuum. It multiplies when shared. That's why I keep making videos, keep writing, keep showing up, not because I have all the answers, but because I want to be a voice in the noise that whispers. You are not alone. You are not broken. You are becoming. There is something incredibly healing in knowing that you're part of a much bigger, unseen community, people all over the world who are also trying, also healing, also blooming, quietly, bravely, in their own seasons. A while ago, I reopened my Etsy shop for a short while. Just a small gesture, but it meant something to me. A symbol that life doesn't have to be huge or perfect to be meaningful. Sometimes just sharing your light, even in tiny doses, is enough. That's what I want my life to be. A steady offering, a safe space, a reminder that healing isn't a destination, it's a way of walking. One breath, one brave word, one ordinary day at a time. So, if you're still carrying fear, if you've been told you can't change, if you're tired of the weight of it all, let me offer you this. You are capable of becoming new again. Maybe not all at once. Maybe not in the way you expected. But in the quiet, slow rhythm of showing up for yourself each day. Like the seasons, like the moon, like springtime after winter. Growth is in your nature. And you, yes, you, are a part of this great, ongoing story of becoming, of learning, of softening, of shining, even when the sky is heavy. The world may not always believe in healing, but I do, and maybe, just maybe, you do too.